During this holiday season, I think the culture tells us it's a time of great happiness, bliss, gleeful kind of celebrations, and so on. And then I find out there's some people that just simply can't get into the spirit of the holiday season. And I think that's especially true for people who've lost someone who's very near and dear to them. I think death is always difficult, but I think in the midst of a holiday season it can be doubly so. And you get even expand that further on where the culture tells us and even asks us questions. Are you happy? Am I happy? I think the very question asking it can even make things more difficult for people who are going through a lot of grief, bereavement, the whole loss kind of question. And what I would say to people is that they need to embrace their sadness in a lot of ways. It's almost like, here I am, I'm gone. No one sheds a tear. There's no pain. What would that be saying about me? In essence, that I wasn't important, not worth grieving over, not shedding a tear. So in some ways, we need to kind of frame that in a way that says, my sadness is okay. It's kind of the shoulda, oughta sort of syndrome that we get people in. You should be happy. You ought to be happy. Look at all the blissful kind of things that are going on in the world around you. So the culture can really put, I think, a guilt trip on people too, who find it very difficult to get beyond the loss of a loved one, someone very near and dear to them. I think what people ought to be doing, if you want to use the oughta, shoulda, is to let people indulge themselves in expressing their sorrow, their grief, their loss. It is a time of bereavement. There's a title of a book that I really like, Doug Manning, who had recounted a woman was trying to console and lift up this woman who had lost a child. And this woman kept going on and on about this and that, about how it affected her. And this other woman tried to distract her away. And finally the woman just screamed at her and he said, "Don't take my grief away from me." People need that. They need that opportunity to work it through, opportunity for healing. But yet our culture says, no, be happy. Don't worry, be happy, to paraphrase, I think, Bobby McFerrin's song. We are very rightly sad when we have the loss of a loved one. I would be a little more concerned with someone who is not experiencing that sadness, that grief about the loss. The ones that I'm worried about are the ones who don't express it, who bury it. Those are the ones that I really feel need the help. You can't fake grief. You can't pretend it away. You try to bury it, this is where you get into pathological grieving. You cannot bury it. It will not go away. Just like diabetes will not go away by pretending. You need to address it. You need to take care of it. Just like you would any kind of physical ailment, get the proper care for it. You've got to get the proper care for grief, for loss. And you cannot just pick any doctor to deal with any malady. We've got specialists now, yeah? We've got general practitioners yet. But if I got something wrong with my heart, I want a good cardiologist addressing it. If I've got something wrong with my spirit, I want a good spiritual director. If I've got something going wrong emotionally, psychologically, I need a good grief therapist. And not every therapist is good at grief counseling. This is what we really specialize here too. Our counselors dealing with families in loss, in grief, in bereavement, they need good grief counseling to help deal with that. There used to be someone had lost a loved one, someone near and dear, and they died later on, not too shortly after that. And we used the expression, they died of a broken heart. We always thought that was kind of a figure of speech. Now the cardiologists are telling us that that actually is a syndrome, that it can affect cardiac functioning. And the way, I just had a conversation this summer with someone. He had lost his spouse in the 50s, 50 years plus, I don't know the exact age. And he said, I found I was having heart issues going on. I went to my cardiologist and he took all the tests, nothing showed up. He says, what you're experiencing is a broken heart and you need other help. You need therapy, counseling, grief counseling to take care of that, which is what he did, and said, no, doesn't have the stuff going on in his heart anymore, physically. So those things all tie together. And that's where the pathology would come in when we don't address it, when we bury it. And it'll come out in many other different ways and symptoms. And what we need to do is to move on in our journey of life. And truth be known, our loved ones, the ones near and dear to us, when they leave us, so often what I've heard them saying, patients that are families, I want you to pick up and continue living your life journey as well as you can. Mark Twain's living the dash as fully as you can. When you're looking at how we grow, it's not just in isolation, though we need that time. We also need time to interact. We need to be present to one another and reaching out, connecting with others, being present. The whole idea of gift giving is really that kind of reaching out to one another. The thoughtfulness, we even use the expression being mindful of someone, is that reaching out, that opportunity. People tend to kind of almost lock themselves up, going to a hermitage. There's this balance, a very delicate balance that's involved between alone time and other time. And maintaining it, I think, is going to be a question of a judgment each person has to make. Because I may need more downtime than you do, and somebody else may need more other time with people. But you can also get some guidance, some wisdom. A lot of different faith traditions have spiritual guides, spiritual directors. And I would also strongly encourage that, using the more psychological term, maybe even reaching out in therapy. What we do in hospice a lot of times is provide some of that grief counseling, helping people to get that balance that they need for themselves. In our culture, we so much espouse this sense of rugged individualism. That's to be glorified, put on a pedestal. That's a bunch of garbage. That we're ruggedly individualistic. We don't really make it on our own. We make it with one another. We make it with each other, and we make it with believing in a God who walks with us and supports us. Some people have started the custom of not just thinking in terms of material, but also reaching out as far as volunteering, being there for others. Lord's Diner, for example, different Salvation Army practices, getting people together. It isn't just, for example, at Thanksgiving time that we're going to be feeding people. We're also giving them an opportunity for interacting. If it's just a question of feeding people, we just deliver meals to them and they can still eat in isolation. I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to lift them up. That idea, again, that I've mentioned several times of presence to one another is so very, very important. That I'm aware of the other, not just to myself. Even the word from the Latin presence speaks about sentire, to be aware, being in front of others. And meal taking, those holiday traditions that we get together as families, so very, very important. Talking about the loss of a loved one can be very acutely felt during the holiday season. I had someone in bereavement describe to me what it felt like when someone near and dear was gone from her life. And she said it felt almost as if a part of me was torn away physically, like a member, an arm, or a leg. It felt like a harsh word, dismemberment. And so I got to thinking about that as to how do we put things back together again? And I almost had to manufacture a word. What would be the opposite of dismemberment? Rememberment. Remembering. Almost invariably around those meals, those festive meals during the holidays, moving from Thanksgiving on through, what happens most often around those tables? Reminiscing, remembering, especially with regard to a loved one that's no longer there. Some have even got to the tradition of putting an empty chair around the table. Say the person who's died is not there this year, and then maybe reminiscing about that person. And I cannot overestimate the power that's involved in that reminiscing, that remembering, putting things together. Those are being present again. That's always mindfulness of one another. What I often experience in the faith communities, and I think it's unfortunate that this happens, and I would preface that even by saying, If anybody promises you that you're going to have a life free of pain, a life free of sadness, a life free of loneliness, economic deprivation, even death, you better start turning away from them, because that's a false promise. I'm sorry, but that's simply not going to happen. I'm reminded of a book that was out in the 70s, book entitled, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. I don't think God has ever promised any one of us a rose garden. Any one of us a life journey that doesn't have these kind of challenges with it. So again, you better be very careful if someone comes across that way. But I think what I would emphasize is, in asking the question again, what can I believe in terms of my faith community? Again, whether that be Hindu, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, whatever faith community. What I firmly believe we can, in effect, hang on to is that God will never abandon us. God will walk with us. God will support us. I could even get into the point of people believe in divine providence. And you ask them, what do you mean by providence? It's kind of like, well, God puts a Star Wars shield around me and protecting me. Well, all of a sudden something bad happens to me. Some crap happens to me. What happened to the shield? I guess it was not impenetrable. There goes their faith in God now. I kind of hesitate to use this example because I think a lot of people might find it very meaningful. I'm sure many of you have seen the poster where there's a beach sand, and down the sand, 2 sets of footprints. And the poster kind of indicates that here I am walking the journey of life, and again, whatever I believe in my faith community, say Christianity. So 2 sets of footprints, mine, and then, say, Jesus walking with me. Then all of a sudden, 1 set of footprints disappears. And the initial response on the poster is, during this time of challenges and difficulty and darkness and loss and whatever else you want to say, why did you abandon me, God? Why only 1 set of footprints? And what's the answer that's given after that? I didn't abandon you. I picked you up and carried you. Well, it sounds really beautiful, doesn't it? Very tender. But again, to go back to my earlier point, I'm sorry to have to say this, but God doesn't take away any of this. But what I firmly believe in is that God does not abandon us. God will walk with us through that, walk with us side by side. And every faith community has a different way of putting that into language. In the Christian tradition, we talk about God's incarnation with us, the Word of God, walking with us and helping with us. And the historical figure Jesus Christ did that so well with people on the margins. He was always out there picking people up. So God continues to walk with us to try to create this new life within us. In the Christian community, we believe God above all walks with us by God becoming incarnate, the incarnate Word. That's what Christianity celebrates at Christmas time. And the key word we use over and over again is Emmanuel. God is with us. Emmanuel, God is with us. So to conclude here, now even though love may be gone, life may be gone, someone near and dear is gone out of my life, walking with me on my journey, how can I still reach out to those around me in love? How can we be present to one another? How can I find light in the midst of darkness? Those are, I think, very key questions for us as human beings to reflect on. Can I find meaning even in death? That would be the important thing. People ask me in terms of my Christmas activities, and I often tell people, well, I'm busy shopping. And they ask me, oh, I didn't know you go to the malls. And said, no, I'm not in the mall shopping. I'm in the woodworking shop. I do not give a gift that I have not made. Another word for gift is present. And you do the plural presents. You can spell it 2 ways, with a TS or a CE, presence. I think that if we're going to be really lifting each other during the holiday season, we need to be present to one another. That's meaning and purpose. That's what we're about. And that, again, will give us that byproduct that we so like to talk about in our culture of happiness. Yes, am I happy? I'm happy because I find meaning and purpose in life, and I hope you do too.